Hi, I'm Dr. Leah Weiss. I'm a lecturer at Stanford Graduate School of Business and author of How We Work. Live your purpose, reclaim your sanity, and embrace the daily grind. In today's show, we'll talk about purpose and why it matters to you, how to become more mindful and aware as you move through your daily life, and why compassion is a must-have for your business. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm the founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness so you can reach the next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. Today, we're going to be taking an insider look at how to live your purpose, regain your sanity while embracing the daily grind. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any past episode of our shows in our Facebook community by going to Dov Baron Leadership and Loyalty Podcast on Facebook. There you can chat about the show. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. Remember, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're always in need of your help in staying relevant. So please get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. You can also catch us on traditional radio stations across the United States every Monday and Thursday, all the way from Georgia to Wisconsin. Also, you can look for us on Roku TV, where there's over 100,000 subscribers. And if you're a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million viewers and listeners for every single show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. You can also catch us on Google Home or Alexa by just saying, play Dov Baron podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down, dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, someone in the sales suite, a C-suite leader, or a sales leader, a leader in any capacity, you know that we've spoken about it many times, of how important it is to be purposeful, to have a purpose-driven work. However, sometimes the pressures of leadership in all of its forms can make you a little crazy, and it can be difficult. It can feel like you're losing your mind. So is there a way to live your purpose, regain your sanity, and embrace the daily grind? Well, according to our guest today, the answer is a resounding yes. Dr. Leah Weiss is a teacher, researcher, and meditation expert at Stanford University, specializing in the application of mindfulness and compassion in our everyday lives. Leah Weiss Ph.D. is a Stanford Graduate School of Business lecturer and author of How We Work. Live your purpose, regain your sanity, and embrace the daily grind. More than that, she is a strong proponent of bringing mindfulness tactics to that don't include meditation mats into our daily lives. She assists people like you find your purpose at work so you get to feel like you have meaning in whatever it is you do. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome the author of How We Work, Dr. Leah Weiss. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure. You've made my afternoon more joyful already.
Well, that's good. And that crowd was almost as big as the 800 people you spoke to this morning. So it's good to have you here. Let's just dive right into the title. Why How We Work? Because that seems to be a potentially, for me at least, being a psychology background, as a double entendre, how we work inside of our own coconuts and how we go to work. So tell us why that title.
Yes, exactly, for the reasons you're talking about, that the how we show up influences the way that we actually execute the work that we're trying to do. And I think if there's a thesis in the book, it's understanding that this relationship is so fundamental in learning how to better engage with our defaults, change them so that we can show up the way that we most aspire to.
And that's interesting, isn't it? You know, change our defaults, because, you know, one of the things I've spoken about many times on here is that the problem with a default is it's just that. It's a default, therefore it's unconscious, and we're not terribly aware of these things, usually until we feel the consequences of it. And even then, not so much. So talk to us a little bit about the defaults and how we might begin to recognize them.
Yeah, well, there's so many. It's really interesting. There's perceptual defaults, as you know, the ways that we edit information so that we can move efficiently through our environment, but we don't choose which information we're editing. So there's those biases. Then there's the biases that we have from personalizing things that happen in front of us as though they're around us. So that's a really interesting default. And then there's just the mind-wandering default, that understanding the degree to which we are not focused and making efforts to reclaim our ability to hone our attention both precisely, but also open it so that we can understand context and be creative. Both of those capacities we can influence if we get out of the default of the monkey mind.
Yeah, and for so many people, that is so difficult. You know, just I can remember being in my 20s and literally driving. I can remember exactly the road I was driving down. I was driving down Wellington Street in Western Australia, and I can remember screaming out loud, "Shut up!" And I was actually talking to my own head, to the noise in our heads, that most people would not willingly acknowledge that there's a crowd in there all screaming instructions and what's right and what's wrong, and you know, and so as you said, the monkey mind, which we talk a lot about in Buddhist psychology, but like I think the challenge is, Leah, and I really want you to hear your point on this. The challenge is getting the distinction that that's not me.
Yes.
Because the challenge is that people will say, well, you know, it's me. How do I help our listeners, our viewers, sort of go, oh, okay, maybe that's not me.
Yes. Right. Well, and I think, you know, the recognition that thoughts are thoughts, but we don't have to identify with them, is one of these key insights. The de-reification of thoughts, or taking something that seems so true and so literal and so tethered to who I am at core, and then examining it from the perspective of just because it's a habit to think this. And the other part I love about the story that you just shared is I think it's so relatable. You know, the intensity of a highly intelligent, passionate person who was clearly going to go on and be a high achiever like you.
Oh,
that means that's part and parcel of the kind of person who's going to struggle with having such an active mind. And we don't want to get rid of that active mind, because then we're getting rid of that passion and that drive for impact on the world. So it comes back, I think you took it exactly the right place. It's not rejecting the intensity. It's not rejecting the thoughts. It's learning how to relate to it in a way that's sustainable.
Yeah, I'm just doing, you and I were talking about before I recorded, that I'm doing the outline for the chapters for my next book. And one of the chapters is on, it's called Dickens Lie. And Dickens Lie is, I think, therefore I am. No, I think, and that's a lot of not of who I am. And it is that separation, because we do think that, like you just said, I mean, it's fundamental. We go, well, this is my finger, so this is part of me. No, that's your finger. It's an extension of you, but it's not you. And I often say to people, you have to think about your thoughts as like your finger. Yes, it seems to be just absolutely joined to who you are. But if I cut your finger off, it might be nasty, but you will survive, and you won't say, I don't exist anymore. And you'll say, well, that's me over there, the finger. No, it's the same with your thoughts. And I love what you're doing with this, because this is about, as you said, this is about mindfulness without the meditation mats. It's more than that. Walk us through a little deeper into that, because I really want people to grasp that piece.
So my favorite definition of mindfulness, I think, speaks to the approach I advocate for. So the definition of the intentional use of attention. It's very simple. Nowhere in it does it say eyes closed, legs crossed. We can, and in fact, we should intentionally be using our attention all the time. Whether we're working or we're with our loved ones, we should be aware of what we're focusing on. But the problem is, while that sounds simple, it's challenging to do, especially if we're not in the habit of it. I think the good news is that we can actually change our habits, and there's lots of great research showing that in a matter of weeks, we can train ourselves to be much more honed both on a focused attention and contextual attention, that we can learn the kinds of skills that put us into flow state, that put us into more connection with our loved ones, because we're not distracted. So they actually there's someone there to meet them at the end of the day. And we leave work at work, we leave home at home, or we know when we're not. All of that, like the challenge of work-life conflict, I think fits in here in a really important way. If we're aware of what we're focusing on, that's the foundation for having a much better experience in both work and the rest of life.
So let's, you brought up something there that I think is important for us to look at. And we may disagree on this, but one of my foundational pieces in the work that I do in the research that I've done with millennials and working with millennials is, I love this, by the way. I love that they understand that work-life balance is bullshit.
Yes.
And so talk to us about that perception of, I've got to have this work-life balance, and why it from my mind, and you can, again, I'm up for you disagreeing with me, but from my mind, it's something that belongs at least a generation ago.
I agree. I think that it's really, it sets us up to be in conflict with ourselves if we're trying to seek something that's balanced. I know a number of years ago, when I was in graduate school, I had a series of conversations with a Franciscan priest, and he introduced at that point, and this was before I had the 3 kids I have now, the idea of rhythm. And if you think in terms of a rhythm in your day, in a period of time, that you can set things up intentionally, but not be trying to like spin plates in the air and balance all of them. And I think that the framework that I used for it, I was just showing this morning in a talk I did for about 800 women executives at a biotech company. I put up the slide of, did you see the BBC meme that came out about a year ago of an anchor who was doing an interview from home, and his toddler runs in the room, and he's like, he runs it, and the baby
fabulous,
amazing, and he's like horrified, right, and pushes the baby out until the caregiver comes and yanks the baby out of the room. And then there's a follow-on meme of a woman who's doing an interview from home, who scoops the toddler up, gives the toddler a bottle, cooks a turkey, does all, literally diffuses a bomb, all while eloquently doing an interview, having a conversation like we're having now. And to me, I put these up because I want to make the point, what's your model? Who do you want to be? Do you want to be highly integrated, or do you want to aspire to have a neat, clean division, which, by the way, I don't know that that's possible, but at least know what your mental model is. At least be
right. That's a great example of it, because, this again, it's one of the things I love about the millennial work generation. And again, I say this many times, and I want you as the listener and viewer to get it, that when I talk about millennials, I'm not talking about kids. We're talking about people who have kids. They're 38 years old as we record this, 38 going on 39 years old. So they're not young people, although they can be. So they don't look at the work-life balance in the same way, and they understand this integration and this nonsense we have about always being professional is just that. It's nonsense. And I love that millennials are going, like you said, that second meme I just think is so funny and beautiful, and it's such a great example of, yeah, work doesn't end at 5 or start at 8 or any of that. It's like, so some of the millennials who work for me are working at 2 o'clock in the morning because that's when they work best. I don't care. I don't care about your timestamp. I care about what you do. So it's lovely. It's wonderful. And I think it's delicious that you're making that so clear for us. Let's go to the piece around purpose, because that is my focus in the work that I do. It's about helping companies, individuals, organizations find their purpose. And this is for you is a big passion. You want to help people find their purpose at work so they can feel good about what they do. Tell us why that was such an important part of the book for you, an important part of your work for you, and maybe even give us some steps into finding that.
Sure. So purpose, I think, when I was doing research, was one of the most surprising elements, not because the idea was new, but because the research on the biological impact for us as human beings when we either have or do not have purpose is profound. And I think this is research that's not been integrated into certain organizations and our thinking about how we structure life. We know that there's issues with disengagement, but the idea, and we know that you want your organization to be purposeful, but the fact that we need it to be healthy. So some of the studies that I first started reading about and speaking with researchers in this space about were like, our inflammation goes down, our antivirals go up when we're purposeful, we have lower risk of Alzheimer's disease, we have better glycemic profiles, like amazing, profound impact on our bodies. Then from there, I became interested, well, what do we know? I mean, clearly this is a question that we as human beings have been thinking about for thousands of years, right? Like the wisdom traditions, it's around purpose and our relationship to the world in some fundamental ways. But I was curious in terms of the research, what do we know in terms of increasing purpose? So I went to a couple of rounds of invitational. There was a Templeton funded initiative on purpose, and it was bringing together researchers from around the world who work with purpose in adolescence, purpose in organizations, health, biological markers. And what I learned there is that there's basically these two approaches to purpose. One is top down, kind of like our mission statement, what we want to be remembered for at the end of our lives, having, a clarity in both our professional selves and also what we want to contribute to the world. So it's kind of top down, capital P. Then there's this emergent kind of thing around values excavation, understanding where I'm passionate, what kind of work I procrastinate against, and really doing an audit of our relationship to our time and calendars. And so all of those, so I bucketed it together of there's these categories of get clear, here's what I'm about, and then there's these categories of pay close attention to how my days and weeks look. And this is where having coaching and conversation is so important, telling our life story, having echoed back to us what our values were in different phases so we can clarify them in dialogue. It can be really profound to just get it outside of our heads. So the kinds of tools that I've been sharing with people are in both of these categories, a mission statement that we can share. I have a link for, I can give you, and then a time to purpose audit that takes you through. You can do it in the context of a week, really focusing in the beginning of the week, setting intentions, clearing your calendar as much as possible, day by day, asking yourself questions about how you felt about the time that you spent. At the end of the day, giving yourself a clear assessment on how much of your time was actually spent on things that are most important to you. And then again, at the end of the week, looking back, how was this week spent? What have I learned? What mistakes did I make that I want to do differently in the future? And so I think, to me, it's both combining the very practical, not reducing it exactly to time management, but it's time to purpose management. And just, I think a lot of this stuff, understanding that we all have work that we have to do that is not gonna light us up, but we can bring meaning to it. There's the studies that I most love is interviewing janitors in a hospital about if they experience themselves as having a job, working in exchange for a paycheck, a career they're trying to develop towards being facilities manager, or a calling. And they view their work as purposeful. You might think a hospital janitor, well, they're probably going to be in the job category. Actually, a number of them, it's the opposite. And people ask this question, they're concerned, isn't purpose a privileged idea? You find highly purposeful janitors in hospitals who view themselves to be instrumental part of the care team, because infection will spread and people will die. And they make relationships with the patients that last when the patients have left the hospital, either healed, or they show up at funerals. Like, you see these amazing stories that happen when people bring purpose to their work.
Love that.
That's inspiring. I want to have that. I want everyone to have that, and to be able to create. Maybe we can't all pick up, maybe we can, but maybe we can't, or we don't feel like we can change our externals. But does that mean we can't do something profound internally? What do you think about that? And how do you think about it? I know this is an area you do a lot of work in as well.
Yeah, I'm loving what you're saying there, because I agree. It's a big part of the work that we do. We believe that everybody in your organization should be purpose driven. And there has to be an alignment between the personal purpose and the corporate purpose. And if there's not an alignment, real purpose is a magnet, in that it attracts and it repels. On one side it attracts, and the other side it repels. And if there's not an alignment of purpose, great, off you go. We're happy for you to go somewhere else where there is a better alignment, and that would be wonderful, because it creates the space for the people that there is great alignment. But I love what you're saying there, and I think it's so rarely spoken about. And you're right. I think that people come at it from the other side. They think that when I talk about purpose, it's this privileged sort of first world idea. And what I know from all my travels around the world and working with great teachers from around the world and studying different cultures is, yeah, it ain't got anything to do with money. In fact, what I found was that if on a percentage level, I would say the percentage level of people I've met who have a lot of money versus people who are at the lower end of finances tend to be less purposeful. They tend to be more material. And I think that because purpose, essentially at the basic level of purpose, is the question, what is the meaning of this? Whatever this is, whether it's one's life or whether it's this, cleaning this bucket, what is the meaning of this? And when we ask that question, I don't think we ask that question in comfort. I think we ask that question in discomfort. And I think that that's the challenge with being privileged, is that, I don't really need to ask that question. I bought another Rolls Royce. I don't really need to ask that question. I just got a $100,000 raise. I don't really need to ask that question. But when you face the discomfort, and by the way, a lot of people I work with are very high level, and then they hit the discomfort. And that might be a divorce or a diagnosis or just feeling like, shit, is this it? I've got all that stuff and my life feels empty, and they left with that question. What is the meaning of this? It's a profound question that makes us look at the purpose of our lives. And I think that when you struggle in any form, you're brought to that question. And I think that people like yourself doing this work is in many ways permissive. And that's what I love about it. It's saying it's okay to ask that question, because I think that on the other side of it is privileged people feeling like, oh, I shouldn't ask that question. It's entitled. I should just be grateful, because of course there's a lot of memes and stuff around being grateful, and I'm certainly in favor of that. But it doesn't mean you give up this question, which is, what is the meaning? What is the purpose of this? So I love what you're doing with that, and I love that you bring it to the attention of, hold on a second. You think this is about the CEO? No, this is about the janitor. At least as much. At least as much. Fabulous. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Well, I love hearing how you're applying. And I think that the point you're making that we should be clear about purpose and use that so people can select in and out is crucial. And this is something a lot of my students struggle with when they're finishing their MBAs, the ones that I teach at the business school, how sort of transparent to be about who they are and what they value. I'm curious, what would you advise, someone who's MBA 2, they're in deep with their loans for the program, and they feel a pressure to be someone they think they should be, as opposed to really showing up as who they are. And if that selects out of certain positions, maybe that's good.
Well, I'm the person who rubs up against education in the form that it's in a lot. And what I mean by that is, first of all, you're asked what you want to do, what you want to be when you're 17 years old. 99.99999% of us haven't got a clue what we want to be at that age. That's number one. Then you're going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in an education that is, if it has any technical side to it, that is going to be grossly outdated by the time you graduate. So there's another problem. And what we know is that when I entered the workforce, being my age, I was asked, what do you want to do for your career? It was a 20 to 40 year question. Millennials, it's a 4-year question. 4 years is a career, not a job. It's a career. And you spent more than that getting a master's degree, because you now spent 6 years getting a master's degree in something you probably don't give a crap about. So what I really think is important is that it's important to reevaluate every step of the way. Now, I also believe that no learning is wasted unless you waste it. And what I mean by that is, what is the application of this if I was to follow my purpose? So I've done this nursing degree. I'm just making one up. I've done this nursing degree, and I am not interested in emptying bedpans, and it just doesn't light my candle. But what is it that you learned in that context that can be enormously valuable to you as you enter into dance, or you enter into business, or you enter into something else? So for me, I think that this is, I think, where we self-sabotage, is that we go, that was a waste of time. Nope, it wasn't a waste of time. It's only a waste of time if you make it one. The best story I've got of that is that when people say, well, how long have you been doing this? Well, I've been doing this for 34 years, and it's my second career. And they go, really? Yeah, I did my other career, I think, for 11, 12 years. And they go, really, you're that old? Yep, I am. I'm that old. And they go, well, what was you doing before? And I said, what I did before, I would never tell people. I was ashamed of it. Now, I had businesses in Canada, in the UK, and in Australia, but I was ashamed of it because it didn't align with the study of psychology, with the study of leadership, the study of quantum physics, all those things. So I hid it. But what I know was that first career trained me beautifully to understand psychology. I was in the hairdressing business. It trained me, but my shame didn't let me. And so when I shamed myself around it, I lost the learning. And it took me about 8 years into this career that I went, what the hell are you doing? That was a fabulous training ground. So don't dismiss what you've learned. Embrace it from the point of view of your purpose. And part of my purpose was always understanding people at a deeper level and what drives them. And hey, and I was a counselor with a pair of scissors. We tell our hairdressers more than we tell our therapists.
Every time I've gone to a new hairdresser, I always ask them about that. And it makes so much sense but your bigger point, though, I think is really important. And a lot of people that I end up working with at the business school who come back mid-career, they're coming to do a degree to help them pivot. And I think that you're right, that trying to divorce the next step from where you came from is just a recipe to have more pain. That makes much more sense to excavate what was it that you learned that you're going to carry forward, and also that you're going to say no to in your next iteration. I think that's really powerful.
But you just said something that's very important there that I'm always hammering home with the people I work with, and that is, I think one of the most difficult things in the world is to learn to say no. Yeah. And it's particularly to say no to what they think you should say yes to, because they will always have an opinion. And it takes balls, it takes gonads, it takes strength, it takes chutzpah, it takes strength to say no to what's not true for you. even if it's only owning that it's not true for me in this moment. It might be true for you next week, but this week, and just being with that and coming to peace with that is one of the ways you quieten that monkey mind that you talked about, because the monkey mind is always going to be telling you what you should do. And I think that most people get shoulded to death. They die long before they're buried under those shoulds. You know, one of the things you talk about in the book that I think is really important, that I want to, because you just did some great work around this, which is the importance of cultivating compassion in the workplace. Talk to us about that, because it's something that, you know, again, becomes one of those woo-woo soft skills that so often leaders will bang up against, you know, and even ones I've spoken to are like, you know, they're embracing soft skills, but they, oh, you know, I can't really go into the empathy and compassion piece. That's a bit too fluffy.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that and why that's so important.
Yeah, it's crucial. And I agree with you. There's a lot of people who struggle with it I think there's a variety of reasons people struggle, mental models about what's needed by way of an effective state of mind to compete and be impactful. So I think I typically start from the research, because I want to make a compelling cognitive case for someone to at least then consider, okay, this is logical. Now I will potentially take the next step of trying to implement. So from the perspective of research, one of the big problems that companies often talk about is retaining their talent, right? For this, whoever's perceived to be the most valuable talent, there's competition to have them in their company, right? It's so how does compassion play in with retention? Well, if you invest in your people, if they feel like you care about them, then they understand and they engage more quickly. If you look at the opposite of this, if you are signaling to people, yeah, I care about you, but I'm not willing to invest in you. When you have a sick relative, even if you've been here for 5 years, if I gave you the money or the time off, I couldn't scale that to everybody. So best for me to keep it pragmatic at that point. I won't support you. So the message that people get at this point is that they cannot, the company that they have stayed up late for, that they have missed their children's childhood events for, that company isn't actually there for them at that point, right? They feel hurt. They feel dismissed. They may not leave right then when their relative is ill and they're trying to cope with something happening in their life, but you best believe their loyalty goes down. But then you have to magnify all the onlookers. So wait, Dove has been here for 5 years. I'm new, but look how they treated Dove when his mother was sick. So clearly that's what they're going to do for me. So everybody's loyalty goes down.
That's a great point.
We've studied in terms of dollars and cents and retention, what happens in companies when they take a short-term legalistic view of what it means to support people. That's one example. And there's all these really interesting, you can hire for compassion. You can look at it as a characteristic that you value if you're customer facing, if you're in retail, even if you're just a collaborative kind of tech oriented company, you need people who work nicely with other people. How do you vet for that? Well, we have some interesting ways to do that. A lot of companies I work with, they say, well, we value compassion, but then when you get to the kind of middle management level, people are experiencing a crunch. They're not actually investing in it, in the performance reviews and the bonuses. It comes down to only dollar metrics, which is then counter incentivizing people to invest in other people. So you have to, then you're messaging one thing and you're doing another, and that's creating confusion for people. And that confusion itself is making you look like you aren't in integrity when you're out talking about compassion publicly, but you're actually treating your employees badly, and the world gets small. Like the world of MBA students, when you're the talent that you're trying to attract, people talk to each other. They know what the environments are like. So I think there's a lot of very practical reasons to pay attention to compassion, but starting with the research, I think, helps compel the focus that it warrants.
Yeah, you said a couple of really interesting things in there, because I think that places with a lot of prestige, let's say Amazon or Google or whatever it is, they have the bean bags and they have the coffee machines and they have those kinds of things. What most people don't know is they have a horrible time of retention, horrible time, because they're feeding you, but so you'll stay there, and you don't go home, and you may have childminding, but that means so that you're gonna be with your kids, and I think that too few companies recognize how much their people invest in them, and they go, well, we've invested so much in our people. Yeah, well, as you said, if I miss the cello practice or the cello concert of my kid, that's a pretty major investment I just made in the company because of the deadline. And I just don't think that companies really grasp that. And I don't think that most companies are even aware of when they're out of integrity around what they're saying. So, this is a very important point I think you're making, because it's so vital, as you said, when it has all boats are lifted in high water, but they're also all boats are grounded in low water. And I think that that's the thing, is that people are paying attention. One of the things I say to my leaders all the time is that whatever you think is private, consider it public, because somebody knows, somebody's telling somebody somewhere, and you gotta know that. You have got to be aware of that. And so it's a great message and a really important one of why it's so important. 40% of your top talent today, so people who are not appearing unhappy in any way, shape, or form, are already, this is the research, are already looking for another job. 40% of your top people. So 4 out of 10 of your top, not of your people, 4 out of 10 of your top people are already looking for someone else. So if you don't give them a good enough reason to be there and money is not enough, they are already walking. And so it's a really important thing. Now, you brought up some great research in the book about in the Wall Street Journal surveyed hundreds of executives about soft skills. And I think that this is an important piece of research, because I want our listeners to grasp this, because they might go, yeah, well, Dr. Weiss's research is with not our kind of people, right? So talk to us about that research and what was found out.
Yeah, so there's been a really interesting inquiry into what is it that happens if you get, I'm spot on with what you said before about technical skills, that when people train in undergrad or in graduate school for technical skills, they become obsolete very quickly. But you can enter the workforce based on your current technical skills, with basically the employer is saying, well, you know how to learn. So they're more measuring you on your ability to learn than the skills themselves, which are going to be obsolete. But the problem is, after people are hired, the thing that blocks them from ascending in their career is the people skills. And time again, the hiring managers don't talk about a shortage of technical competencies. They talk about a shortage of people who can perform the task but have the people skills that you really need to be able to collaborate and innovate. And frankly, the amount of time that we're spending at work, we spend way more time with our colleagues and with our loved ones. So it matters a great deal. And when you have people who are obtuse socially, it creates all kinds of legal issues and compliance problems. So it's actually, I think that the bar is raising for awareness on the value of these kinds of competencies, and especially when the metrics of the billions of dollars that are lost when you have people who aren't engaged, when they're not in a growth mindset, they're difficult to deal with. All of these things create very expensive costs.
Absolutely. Now, obviously the book, How We Work, is an important book. Who do you feel is the ideal person should read this?
So I think, I've heard different groups of people. Some would be someone who's who's experiencing work-life conflict and trying to make meaning. Definitely the set of tools that I have in the book are vetted with people who are CEOs and C-suite and who are trying to do the personal and professional development. And, I think it's the way I've tried to describe it is to give accessible research and a whole array of tools to approach any given topic. So for purpose, there's a bunch of ways you can do it. So you pick out ones that resonate with you so it can be as broadly applicable. That's been the goal.
I mean, I can certainly see the importance of it at an executive level, but in what you've been talking about today, I think it's vital for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, individuals, because and one of the things I loved that you talked about, and we didn't get too much into it, but I'd kind of like to circle back a little bit, was this piece around rhythm. I really liked that because it takes us away from this desire to the seesaw balance thing, but rhythm. Can you walk us through a little bit more on how to recognize our rhythm? Because I've said to people for a long time that you've got to recognize where you need to be out of balance and when you need to be out of balance. But I feel like you're taking this a little step further. So please share with us a little bit more about recognizing and even orienting that rhythm.
Well, I love the point that you made earlier about people understanding when they work well. Like if you're a night owl and you have the flexibility in your job to do work at a time that you're biologically going to be at your peak. I think also knowing some people are just do better with slow and steady and having like a habit kind of approach, and other people I'm more like this, like bursts of work, do a huge amount of work and then unplug and take a break. So knowing your own personality, I think, has a lot to do with it. But, I think also, I was just talking this morning at the biotech company that I was giving the talk to about the challenge of organizations trying to set up a marathon distance with a sprint pace, and it's just not possible. So I think from an organizational perspective, whether you're a solo entrepreneur or a huge company, we have to realize that if we try to do that, people will break. And you see this increase now in people who are not just getting sick for a week, but they're out on disability for months on end because the pace just doesn't work. So I think understanding there will be, to your point, periods where we have to sprint, and we have to then give an opportunity for there to be periods that we're not sprinting, that we're resourcing ourselves and it's more sustainable so that we're ready the next time that we need to sprint, that we're not lopsided all the time.
But I love what you said there, and I think it's important, and I think that too few people actually stop to ask themselves, what is my rhythm? What is my style? I know people who work at their best after 10 p.m. when, traditionally work doesn't, you don't start work at 10 p.m. And they're not night workers. They just, they have this 2-3 hours where they're super productive at 10 p.m. I know other people like myself, I like to work at 5 a.m. If I work at 5 a.m., and I'm a weirdo, I have two places where I'm the strongest. It's 5 a.m. and it's 10 p.m. And if I can get those two, if I can get a couple of hours in both of those, like 5 a.m. to 8, oh man, I'm just like in there, nothing's distracting me. 10 p.m., everything else is wound down, I'm in there. And that's my real like production work day. But I actually, my conversational work day, this kind of stuff, that's actually better for me. Again, first thing in the morning, but also mid-afternoon. So it's fascinating that paying attention to where so not only your workplace rhythm, but where you're not in that rhythm and where you're in another kind of rhythm. And so it's, I love that you're bringing this to people because we've been so locked into this stupid 9-to-5 thing that belongs to generations before us and is part of the industrial age that we're not part of. And we're still living as if we're working at the Ford Motor Company on a convention line. It's just craziness. So thank you for that. It's really great. Tell us, is this how you've always been? I mean, you said you got 3 kids now. So, I wonder, what was sort of the one thing that you did for a long time that actually blocked you from success that you probably thought at the time was a good thing to do?
I was very literalist about more meditation is better. I was on earlier in my life, like a personal sort of quest to learn and integrate. And I became very, I'm grateful for the meditation retreats I did. But I think at some point it stopped serving me to think of more as better, and to understand that it's about integration, it's about mindset, it's about unlocking blind spots. And once I've started focusing on that, I see the kinds of growth as a person become much more interesting, right? Like that it became, so I think some of these mental models, but for me particularly, so the focus that I have, 10 years ago, I never would have been willing to write a book that was talking about mindfulness without meditation, ever. I would have said, if you're serious about it, you will get your butt on the cushion. And if you're not, you're a joker and I don't want to talk to you because I can't help you, you can help yourself. Like I was very sort of fundamentalist about that. And I've completely shifted in thinking around this. And I think it's been helpful to reach more people because look, if someone is hardcore about meditation, they still have to ask and answer, how are they going to be mindful off of the cushion?
Yes, exactly.
Someone can't get themselves into meditation. Do they not deserve access to mindfulness? That's also crazy.
Yes.
But I think it took seeing through my own sort of commitment to a jock sort of mentality about meditation, which is funny to say, but it's true.
But it is. And it's certainly the human failing. We think more is better. If anything, oh, this drink feels good, so I should have a bottle. Well, you might not be feeling much better soon. But, and I've said this before, that, we have a mindset of more is better, but better is better. Yes.
Yes.
Not more is better, better is better. It's the quality, not the quantity. When I started meditation and I got into it, there was a point there where I was doing 4 hours of meditation a day. And then trying to get to bed early enough so I could get up at 5 a.m. or 4 o'clock in the morning and meditate. A couple of things suffered. Was it beneficial? Absolutely. Did it train my mind? Absolutely. Am I ever going to be doing 4 hours again? I very much doubt it. I cannot see that. But as you said, it's that training. And I certainly would not recommend that for anybody, but it's part of the thing we do. We get a bit obsessive about things. And it's, for me, it's like, it's okay that you're obsessive. But again, don't anchor your boat to it, because as I said, with your education, whatever it is you're learning, integrate it. As you said, integration is more important than anything else. And so, I dived into Buddhism and I lived and ate and slept and breathed Buddhism. I did the same thing with the Tao. I did the same thing with Kabbalah. I did the same thing with Gnostic Christianity. I did the same thing with Vedanta. But what emerges is what's true. And so I've decided, I've not lost any of those things, but some things are not appropriate for you. And I think that's, again, back to that integrating your learning, which is so powerful. As a leader, you're working with companies, you're doing research, you're writing books, you're doing great work. But it is my observation that great leaders, particularly conscious leaders, are always committed to their own growth. And as successful as you are, you're lecturing and teaching in one of the best schools in America. You're working with great companies. You're speaking at these great conferences and writing and all those kinds of things. But as a successful leader, I know that you are still working on yourself. That's what we're all doing. So what's one thing that you're still working on within yourself, within your humanity?
Yeah, I earlier in my career, around the time I had 3 children very close in age, and I did not invest in my physical health, and it's been a challenge ever since. And that's something that I'm really focused on as like my crucible for learning of really understanding what needs to happen to make the changes that I want to make in my health. So that's my 2019 for start from today, but that's my growth edge to really do that consistently and in a way that makes sense, not trying to internalize somebody else's way of doing it, but really honor my own and do it sustainably. And really challenge my own narratives that block that, because they're there. Early on, it was, around guilt, working mom guilt, and, feeling like I was gone so much, and how could I spend more time away from my babies? And, it wasn't wrong, but it wasn't helpful. And,
Right.
So understanding now, well, what's the impact that I can have on my children of prioritizing my health and teaching them that? There's all these reframes, but it's a process. That's my learning area right now.
And that's so well said too, because I think that, again, we were bombarded with all the shoulds about what, health or whatever it might be. And they don't consider where we're at. We see the girls on Instagram who are in phenomenal shape. We see to say, oh, we must follow what they do, but they're not you. And a very good friend of mine I interviewed recently on the show, I've got many friends in the fitness world. I'm from that world myself, and he was talking about vegetarians and all this. And I said, listen, here's the bottom line. You're a vegetarian and it works for you, that's the right diet. If you're not a vegetarian and it works for you, that's the right diet. Whatever works for you is what works for you, but you have to pay attention to what works for you. And so for some people, they take up running and it's great. I took up running in my mid-30s. I've never been in more pain in my life. It was horrible, but I could run in my teens. I couldn't run in my 30s. It was just too damn painful. That's not my kind of workout. You have to find out what works for you with anything. And this is, I think, is so central to your message. When you're asking about the meaning of your life, when you're asking about the purpose of your life, it's so easy to look out there and go, well, Leah's doing this and she thinks that's important, or Dob's doing that and he thinks that's important. Who gives a shit? It's what's true for you. Where can you come back to that honesty about what is really true for you, what works for you? Because not everybody has to look the same or be the same, and not everything matters the same. That's what makes life interesting and valuable. So thank you for that, by the way. I really appreciate that vulnerability. So in a world where we are often terrified to offend, we're trained to be terrified, particularly as you speak at a university. What is your bravest opinion?
Yeah.
I love asking this question because it's like, we're also like, oh, I don't know if I can talk about that. But I think it's important because it reveals us.
I mean, I think I hedged earlier on some of the ethics around, whether we could, and whatever language you want to use, become more awakened or aware or conscious in any line of work. And I think as I'm getting older, I'm more clear that when we're harming other people and we know it, there is no hedging of that. And I think that being in integrity with ourselves, and I think this is one of the challenges in a polarized world, what to do when we see lines in the sand of this, what I believe to be right and wrong. I'm, and in my context, the academic freedom part and not wanting to assert my opinions, but I am asking sharper questions of my students to really kind of push them to really be clear when they're out of integrity with themselves. And similarly for myself to admit when, there's context that I don't feel good about working in. If I feel like my message or training is being used to prop up an image of a compassionate organization that's their leadership is actually not committed to any real change. I'm finding myself much more yeah, no, life is short. Let's not work together.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Thank you. I love your courage. I appreciate it. That's fabulous. Tell us, what brings you joy?
my babies, knitting leg warmers, hiking. Knitting leg warmers for babies, ideally. Whenever I find out anybody in my circle is pregnant, that's like the first thing I go to do.
That is cool.
Playing. Messy playing with my kids. Play-Doh is awesome. We had a lot of fun with Play-Doh yesterday.
That is fabulous. Fabulous. Good respite from the academia.
Totally necessary.
What is your guilty pleasure?
My guilty pleasure, I like to, I read only Buddhist books for many years, and now I'm just really loving so much fiction and bad fiction and all kinds of fiction, just narratives, and really diving into other perspectives, even badly written ones and mysteries and all of it.
Fabulous. That's pretty cool. So as we come to the end of the show, I want to ask you, as our viewers, our listeners are here, that we've had this wonderful conversation about your book and about the messages and about what it is that you're sharing. But my final question is always the same, which is, tell us something that you would love for our viewers, our listeners, to go away and do, preferably within a few hours, but certainly within the next 5 working days, that would be really practical so they could really get this.
Yeah. Pay attention to how you're responding to the activities that you're doing. Like, really give yourself permission to notice, even if something that you identify with, you actually don't enjoy. Like, let yourself uncover that. Be a detective in your own life with your own time. I think that's a really great starting place where we can build on that with compassion and mindfulness, but getting really solid on our purpose and lack of purpose.
That's fabulous advice. It's rock solid. Dr. Leah Weiss, this has been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you for being with us. Please tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you and all your wonderful resources.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real blast to hang out with you, Dov, and to spend time with all of you listeners and viewers. My website is Leah Weiss Ph.D, and a bunch of the tools I've talked about you can find there. And I'd love to hear from folks. So if you use any of these ideas or tools, give a shout. I'd love to hear how it works for you.
Fabulous. Thank you. So again, that's leahweissphd.com. And of course, we'll put that in the show notes for you so you can get access to that. It has been a true pleasure and honor. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. Thank you. And remember, dear listener, you can chat about this show or any past episodes of our show in our Facebook community by simply going on Facebook and looking for Dov Baron Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. Remember, the research consistently shows that one of the biggest challenges facing even the most successful companies can be somewhat counterintuitive, in that these fast-growing companies often hit a point where they realize they're spending a fortune attracting, training, and developing talent, only to have them leave at an alarming rate. If you're sick of investing in training in your talent, only to have them leave before you get your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide you with the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, providing you with the concrete soft skills to get you and your organization to the top and keep you there. Why? Because you can't outsource authenticity. Always remember to stop by the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need www. Just matrix like the movie .fullmontyleadership.com and get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. It's valued at $197. It's absolutely free to you for tuning in. You can tap into the 5 areas of leadership to find out where your real strengths are. Remember, you can also catch us on Google Play and on Alexa by simply saying play Dov Baron Podcast. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you can play detective in your own life. Find the true meaning. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.